Welcome back. So a little bit later than usual, we're bringing you not just one chart of the day, but three charts of the day. And the topic tonight, mind the gender gap. The World Economic Forum, or WEF, says that the gap between men and women has started to widen again after closing for 10 years. It released its global gender gap report for this year today. The WEF says the reversal is being driven by declining gender equality in political representation, one, and the workplace, number two. 114 countries are ranked, Iceland retaining the top spot at number one, meaning it's the most gender equal in the world. South Africa remains in the top 20, but we have dropped by 4 places, so quite a slippage to number 19. Now, one of the areas where there has been a drop is in terms of equality in the workforce, and here is a very stark stat for you. Last year, an average female global citizen earned $12,000 for the year, or around 168,000 rand. Now, an average man earned nearly double that, $21,000, or around, close to 300,000 rand. Now, South Africa is the third most gender equal country in sub-Saharan Africa. I don't know if you can see this, but we are number 3 after Rwanda and Namibia. Rwanda is performing incredibly well in these world rankings. It's in the top 5 at number 4 in the whole world. Now, South Africa, we're number 19. South African women don't suffer in terms of access to healthcare and political participation, but our ability to match men as income earners has slipped. Wage equality for similar work are falling by 28 places. Women earn on average 77% of what men earn for the same work. All right, let's look at some of the regions, and there was a vast disparity. At the current rate, at the top is Western Europe, and it'll take Western Europe 47 years to close the gender gap in total. The Nordic countries, Iceland, Norway, Finland, and Sweden, are all there in the top 5. In stark contrast, it will take the Middle East and North Africa 580 years, so almost 600 years to close the gap. Sub-Saharan Africa not doing too badly, somewhere here, the third most progressive region, which is the good news. It'll take us 66 years, and we are well ahead of North America even, you can see, for example. All right, let's get some more. We're now joined via Skype from Geneva by Till Leopold, the Education, Gender and World Lead at the World Economic Forum. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Leopold. At the current rate of progress, it'll take 100 years overall to close the gap between men and women. Put that in perspective for us compared to previous years, a decade ago, last year perhaps.
Good evening from the World Economic Forum in Geneva. So yes, as you already mentioned, it is actually the first time since we conduct this study, that the first time that we conducted it was in 2006. So after more than a decade of data, this is the first time that we actually find an overall reversal in progress towards gender parity. And this is very much driven by the economic dimension as well as politics. In terms of the South African performance, a lot of the performance we see in South Africa this year is quite similar to this global trend.
It's very self-defeating, isn't it? When there's research that says when women are on boards, companies do well. I've even seen new research saying countries can be more innovative if you allow women to participate.
Indeed, there's a large body of research, both from our own report, but many other studies from many organizations that are consistently finding that, to the point where this is actually really not controversial anymore. So the question really is, why does it take so much effort to make additional progress, given that these things are really quite well established by now? And what we find, of course, is that some of these gaps have really proven quite intractable. So, for example, South Africa, you mentioned this, is actually doing quite well globally. You're in the top 20, despite this slight reversal this year. But even in South Africa, so while in terms of skilled jobs and the share of high-skilled women in the workforce, it is actually one of the most gender-equal countries in the world. Still, for example, with regard to income inequality and wage equality, South Africa has a long way to go. where currently for every 100 rand a man earns in South Africa, a woman only earns 55.
And that wage disparity has become so much, has increased over the last year. Do you know the reasons for that, or is that sort of detail hard to tell?
So as we're looking, as you mentioned, the report really looks at 144 countries. So we are analyzing what the global trends, then looking very much at the situation in particular countries. Certainly, it is a global trend. In fact, we have seen the economic dimensions sort of stagnate and reverse every year now since 2013. So all is not well in that regard. Yeah. However, there are some underlying structural issues here as well. And in particular, what we find is that really these different dimensions, so education parity in educational outcomes, parity in outcomes in the economy and also in politics, really build on each other in a sort of virtuous cycle. But however, that cycle also works in reverse. So for example, if the education system already produces unequal outcomes, then those will filter through to the economy as well.
So that makes this worrying, that it looks like we've slipped in terms of education for girls. And that must be a big concern in a world where skills are becoming so much more important.
Absolutely. So South Africa actually is an interesting example for this, because in terms of participation in higher education and university education, actually in South Africa, we see that many more women are actually enrolled in university than men. However, if you look then at the subject choices of young women, you see really a strong polarization, and in particular, subjects such as engineering, such as computer science, information technology, are very heavily skewed towards men. And of course, these are some of the areas that a lot of studies, including here at the World Economic Forum forecast, will be the jobs that really will sort of determine the labor markets of the future. And if we do not have more gender equality here, it is of course not good for women, but it also really means that there is a drastic skill shortage in the economy and in businesses when it comes to filling those roles.
Very dire. Overall, Mr. Leopold, what about general culture and maybe even people in positions of power, like Donald Trump? I don't know if that has any effect. The United States falling quite significantly as well. And then you've got this huge gap, if we come to Africa, between sub-Saharan Africa and North Africa. And the only things that seem to be different are politics, culture.
So we are measuring 4 dimensions, right? We are measuring the economic dimension, education, health outcomes, and then the political dimension as well. And there's, in different regions in the world, of course, you find different factors. It is not one global trend that is driving it also. For example, in the North African countries, it has historically been true and still continues to be the case that women's participation in economic life and participation in the labor force is somewhat lower than in other world regions. And you also already mentioned this, actually in South Africa and in sub-Saharan Africa more widely, we actually find that the progress here has been very rapid. So it is by all means one of the regions that is actually producing more of the good news on the gender parity story. And some of the underlying factors here are that indeed in terms of the labor force participation of women across sub-Saharan Africa, the region is doing quite well. And certain countries, for example, this explains to a large extent the performance of Rwanda, also have made large progress in including women in the political decision-making process as well. Where, by the way, South Africa also performs quite well. South Africa is currently the top 10 ranked country on the political dimension.
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning Rwanda, like you say, performing well economically and number 4 in terms of the gender gap. In finality, you are saying that you're just looking at the trends globally, but is there any message that the WEF has off the back of this, perhaps to men and even women who are in positions where they can promote other women?
Absolutely. So what we are really measuring in this report is gender equality. So this is not a report that is looking at women's progress just for women as against men. We are looking at the equality of outcomes between women and men. And as we talked about, this is really has been shown to be a major factor of the success of economies and societies. So therefore, it is not a matter of just looking at kind of fixing the women, as this is sometimes called. We really need to look at things such as the distribution of paid and unpaid work in the economy. We talked about the, for example, different fields of study and at what men and women actually study. And these are just some of the things that we need to fix for everybody, not just for women.
All right, thank you so much for your time this evening. That was Till Leopold from the World Economic Forum. And I remember the former Reserve Bank governor saying women should not be scared of numbers. Think of studying maths, science, accounting, and even engineering. So interesting, but unfortunate that after 10 years of progress, the world as a whole now regressing in terms of the widening gender gap.